College football has two different types of watchers. People who think that the sport is a beautiful game played by elegant men who try to win it all. And then there's people that think that they're just brutal, bloodthirsty animals trying to kill one another. But no matter what, it brings people together. Whether that be the fans in the stands cheering on their favorite team, or whether it be the players on the field giving it their all. But without further ado, let's get into the history of this sport, the troubles and the theories and everything in between. The first college football game was between Princeton and Rutgers in 1869, but the game clearly does not look like how we know it today. It was more of a cross between rugby and soccer, but nonetheless, it would be Rutgers going on to win the game. Not that long after the Army-Navy rivalry started, with both teams regularly taking shots at each other. The president attending the game and custom uniforms made especially for the game. But that was the only one starting up then, as we had UNC, NC State, where they play each other in almost every sport. Then there's also the Iron Bowl, Alabama, Auburn, one of the most looked forward to games of the entire season for both fan bases. Then you also have the Lone Star Showdown, UT versus Texas A&M, with both schools regularly taking shots at each other in their fight songs with t-shirts and chants. But then there's the most important one. There's the game, Michigan-Ohio State. We're at Ohio State in the week leading up to the Michigan game. All M's on campus are crossed out to the logo of Michigan. Not too long after the first game, Walter Camp, known as the father of American football, created the first rules of the game. And then a few years later, in 1906, President Roosevelt, Asian Athletics Association, set some rules and regulations to the sport because people were dying, literally dying, ending their lives playing football. Then it was in the game between St. Louis University and the Carroll University Fighting Saints that Bradbury Robinson threw the first ever forward pass in college football history, but it was incomplete, resulting in a turnover on downs. Then, the biggest whipping of all time occurred when Georgia Tech beat Cumberland College 222-0. The story behind this is that Cumberland cheated in baseball, which angered Georgia Tech's head football coach and baseball coach. Who was that man? Just John Heisman, the man that they named the Heisman Trophy after, the man that invented almost everything we see in a normal game of football, such as the down and distance and the score. But anyways, he responded by beating them 222-0 with nearly 1,000 rushing yards in the game. Then a few years later, the Rose Bowl game was started kicking off a plethora of bowl games, but it started out with only 6, and even then it was too much for the critics as seen in this political college football cartoon. Boy, they would have a heart attack if they would have seen the 42 games being played this year. In 1922, E. King Gill of Texas A&M University attended a football game between Texas A&M and Center College, and the Aggies, riddled by injury, he was called down from the stands to stand by in case he was needed to step in the game. This triggered the 12-man tradition at Texas A&M, where the student section stands to show their readiness to appear in a game anytime that their college needs them. But that's not the only tradition in college sports. No. In football at Clemson, they entering the stadium, players will touch Howard's Rock as a tradition at the top of the tunnel. At Notre Dame, it is a play like a champion sign that they press for good luck. But not all traditions involve touching something. No, most of them include all the college fight songs, with some of the most infamous being the Oklahoma Boomer Sooner, the Tennessee Rocky Top, and hail to the victors of Michigan University. In the 1930s, the first ever AP poll came out with the Minnesota Golden Gophers appearing at number 1, and Notre Dame and USC regulars on the list today not being too far behind. Also in the 30s, the New York Downtown Athletic Club awarded the first ever Heisman Trophy to running back Jay Berwanger of Chicago University, with the most recent one being Caleb Williams of USC. But the most controversial one being Reggie Bush, as he had to forfeit his Heisman due to NCAA eligibility rules. 40. It was the Army Golden Knights creating a dynasty, creating the greatest championship three-peat of all time. Another powerhouse was the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and those two collided for what most call the greatest game in college football history, which ended in a 0-0 tie. Then a few years later at Grambling State University, Eddie Robinson, he started his 52-year college coaching career at Grambling State. And then also in the 50s and 40s, it was the Oklahoma Sooners winning 10 straight Big 8 conference championships under the coaching of Bud Wilkinson. But then also another powerhouse winning 3 national championships was the Ohio State University under Coach Woody Hayes. In the 50s, the run game became a bigger part of college football, which hurt Paul Hornig, the star quarterback of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who also created their own TV network to broadcast their game. In the 1956 Rose Bowl, Georgia Governor Griffin criticized the Georgia Tech football team after letting a black man play a bowl game in the Deep South. In the 60s, there was the first use of instant replay in an 1963 Army-Navy game, with the announcer having to say, "No, Army did not just score again. That you are seeing for the first time ever, an instant replay of the score that just happened." Also in the 60s, it was a tier opened up as University of Texas at Austin Longhorns pioneered the option offense, the triple option offense, which became borderline unstoppable. Then unfortunately, on November 14th, 1970, the worst air-related tragedy in U.S. sports history happened, as everybody on a flight back from a game on the Marshall team, coaches, and multiple fans died. The entire team. First-hand accounts say that the months after it, all it was felt was sadness. Nothing else. It was all people talked about for months. And that story about how they became Marshall and they were brought back to prominence has been documented in the movie We Are Marshall. May they all rest in peace. Also in the 70s, it was another movie-worthy story, as Rudy Rudiger, a perennial 4-year walk-on at Notre Dame who spent 4 straight years on the practice squad, finally got his chance to play. After it was the last game that he would ever be able to play against Georgia Tech. All at the last play of the game, all of his teammates were chanting, "Rudy, Rudy, Rudy," and he got to play his dream out and played one snap of college football. And that story was commemorated in the 1993 movie Rudy. But in the biggest shakeup of the NCAA's history up to this point, in 1973 they divided into 3 divisions to combine like-minded schools with like-minded competitiveness and academics into Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. In the 1980s, probably one of the most infamous plays in college football history happened as against Stanford. Cal would return what was supposed to be a squib kick to end the game for a touchdown, but the band was on the field and the player ran through the band to score the game-winning touchdown. Also, starting in 1973, there was a 10-year stretch of running backs that won the Heisman, but that stretch was broken by one man whose name is Doug Flutie, who created one of the greatest plays in college football history in the same year. Also, speaking about first in Heisman history, Charles Woodson in 1997 became the only primarily defensive player to win the Heisman Trophy. And then the next year, another movie would come out called The Waterboy, which showcased the tale of Bobby Boucher, a water boy turned linebacker who helped his team, the SCLSU Mud Dogs, not only snap a 41-game losing streak, but also helped them win the Bourbon Bowl. But also, speaking of bowls, in 1998, also, the BCS was brought in to establish one true national champion. As before that, all media outlets had their own champion. Then in 2001, probably the greatest defense of all time was formed. And the 2001 Miami Hurricanes, who had NFL stars like Ray Lewis, Vince Wilfork, and Ed Reed, all on the same team. A few years later, in 2007, one of probably the weirdest or greatest NCAA college football seasons occurred, and it started off with a bang, with Appalachian State beating the Michigan Wolverines 34-32. It also saw a streak of 7 out of the last 9 weeks. The number 2 team in the nation was upset. But that year ended off with the LSU Tigers winning the BCS championship. However, the BCS would come to an end in 2014 as the college football playoffs were brought into play, which pitted the top 4 teams in a tournament to determine who would be number 1. But they have agreed to, by maybe as soon as 2025, to expand the field to 12 teams.